Listening Fanfiction presents Draco Malfoy and the cousin he'd never asked for. Thank you very much. By Draco will hear about this. Based off the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, part of the Do It All Over Again series. Chapter 1. Draco's Problematic Family and New Secrets to Keep. Draco's summer holidays were a little better than his previous ones, though it would still be a stretch to say he enjoyed them. His father had stopped communicating completely both with him and his mother, which in Draco's eyes was a definite improvement, but did not exactly contribute positively to the atmosphere within the manor. And despite Harry's promises at King's Cross before they had parted ways, he had once again heard very little from his friend. It seemed that Weasley, a few days into their holidays, had attempted to call Harry via the Muggle number the other boy had given them, but had reached Harry's relatives and failed so spectacularly at leading a conversation with them that Hermione had insisted none of them should try again. Draco was glad to not have to meddle with Muggle technologies, but very annoyed that Weasley had so carelessly collapsed the one channel of contact that had been available to them. Hedwig had turned up at his house from time to time, apparently searching the contact to Aquila, and once or twice he had given her a letter for Harry upon her return. The first had gone unanswered. The second had brought forth a short, hastily scribbled note explaining that the Muggles had locked away all of Harry's school things, including his writing utensils, and that they had prohibited any form of communication to the wizarding world. I sneak down sometimes and break into the cupboard so I can do my homework, or in this case, answer your letter. I'm doing okay, but I think it's better if you don't write to me unless it's absolutely necessary. If the Dursleys realize I'm receiving letters, they'll have my head. I'm sorry. I miss you. Draco had made one more exception for Harry's birthday, figuring that presents would count as a necessity. His mother had gone out to Diagon Alley with him, choosing proper clothing and sweets for his friend, happily spending the Malfoy family funds without his father's consent. "The boy saved your life," she had huffed. "The least we can do is give him something else to wear than those lumps the Muggles provided him with." His mother, in a development most surprising to Draco, had taken quite a liking to Harry. Not only had she helped choose his birthday presents, but she had also sat down with Draco sometime in July to have a long talk following the Sirius Black's breakout of Azkaban. Draco had known that his cousin had been sentenced to a lifetime in prison for murder, just like his Aunt Bellatrix and her husband had, but he had been more than a little shocked to hear the background story of his late great-aunt Walburga's son. "Sirius, like your Aunt Andromeda, was disinherited early," his mother had explained gravely. "Walburga did not approve of the company he kept as well as his ideals, not unlike your father knew, actually," she added with a little smile. "It's intriguing how history repeats itself sometimes." "But if he was rebelling against pure-blood elitism," Draco frowned, "how come he ended up a Death Eater?" "That I cannot answer, darling," she sighed. "Neither I nor your father ever knew about his involvement with the Dark Lord, though, mind you, no one ever knew the identity of every single Death Eater but the Dark Lord himself. It was not, after all, a merry little club with a list of members pinned to the wall. Most of the work was done underhand, and it was safer for everyone if as many people as possible stayed in the dark about your own alliances." Her tone was functional, but her expression was tense as she spoke. "What I can tell you, though, is that there is a connection between Sirius and the Potter family." "Are you serious?" Draco asked, stunned. "Yes," she nodded. "Sirius and James Potter were the best of friends throughout their school days, and as far as I know, up until the Potters' deaths, which was why the revelation that Sirius had worked for the other side created such an uproar." "So he was a spy, you mean?" Draco prodded, feeling sicker by the minute. "It is assumed that he was," she shrugged. "I wish I could give you any details, darling, but I don't have them." "Do you think he had anything to do with the death of Harry's parents?" Draco muttered, not sure if he wanted to hear the answer. "Chances are good he did," she said simply. "Oh, Merlin," he whispered, taking a deep breath. "Why are you telling me this?" he inquired at last. "Because," his mother said softly, There is a possibility that Harry is in danger if Sirius happens across him, and not only do you have a life debt to him, but I know that you would never forgive yourself if anything happened to your friend if you could have prevented it. Now I want you to be aware of the peril." Draco couldn't find his voice to return anything, so he just nodded. His mother put a gentle hand on his shoulder as a sign of comfort. "I also think that you should not disclose any of this information to Harry himself."
"What do you mean?"
Draco asked, his voice choked.
"I promised not to lie or hide anything from him after what happened last term. I have to tell him."
"Draco," she said gently, "please think about it. How would the boy react to such news, to knowing that the criminal who might have been involved in his parents' murder was running free?"
Draco gulped, understanding sinking into his stomach like a sack of stones.
"He'd do something stupid," Draco agreed. "He always does when he's angry."
"I really think that in this case it is better if he remains in the dark," she affirmed. "With some luck the Ministry will recapture Sirius quickly, and he will never have to find out. But with the information you have, you will be able to look out for him."
Draco nodded, balling his hands into fists. He felt extremely uncomfortable with the knowledge that he'd have to keep another secret from Harry, but he also knew that his mother was right, and that it was the best way to protect his friend. And what kind of Slytherin would he be if he could not even tell a couple of white lies to keep his loved ones safe? Draco had to wonder, though, why in Merlin's name was it always his family bringing about their doom, like a screwed-up version of that ridiculous Muggle Christmas character Hermione had told him about. Why couldn't it for once be a distant Weasley relative to be led astray, or really anyone who was not sharing a bloodline with him? But that would be too easy, Draco figured, and if his life was anything, it was always horribly difficult. It was the first week of August when he next heard from Harry. Draco was confused as Hedwig suddenly appeared in his bedroom first thing Saturday morning, landing on his pillow and nudging him until he took the letter attached to her leg. The letter was short, informing him that Harry was currently at the Leaky Cauldron. His mother had barely been able to convince him to eat breakfast before he had jumped into the flue to go meet him. Harry was overjoyed to see him, and after a hearty reunion, they withdrew to Harry's room upstairs at the pub, Draco assuring his mother that he would meet her down at the flue again at 6:30 in the evening. "So why are you here?" Draco asked at last in the privacy of Harry's room. "Your letter mentioned something about trouble with the Muggles." "Oh, yeah." Harry nodded, looking sheepish. "I kind of blew up my aunt." "You what?" Draco asked, raising his eyebrows in alarm. "I didn't mean to," Harry stressed. "It was an accident." "How do you accidentally blow up your aunt?" Draco demanded, shaking his head. "Well, she was a jerk." Harry shrugged rather awkwardly. "She said all this stuff about my mom and dad, and I got really angry, and before I knew it, she was soaring high over Privet Drive." Draco's lips twitched at the image those words procured in his mind. Too amusing. "Well, I guess she deserved it," he muttered, coughing. "Still, didn't you get in trouble with the Ministry? I know accidental magic isn't as harshly punished as deliberate casting, but still, you've already received a warning last summer because of Dobby, didn't you?" "Strangely enough, I was not punished at all." Harry frowned. Fudge seemed angrier about the fact that I'd run than about the magic itself. "You ran?" Draco asked sharply. "Yes." Harry blinked. "That's how I got here." "I thought the Ministry got you out of there," Draco returned. "Why the hell did you run?" Harry blushed at that, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. A new one that he had sent him, Draco noted. "I thought they'd put me in a prison," he admitted softly, "so I thought it would be better to hide." "And so you turned in at the #1 wizarding inn on the British Isles?" he pointed out, raising an eyebrow. "Well," Harry frowned, "it was the only place I could think of. I thought I would have been expelled for sure, so I couldn't go to Hogwarts. I thought if I turned up at your place, your father would hand me over straight away, and the Weasleys aren't in the country." Draco sighed, rubbing his forehead in exasperation. "I'm glad nothing happened," he murmured. "That was dangerous, mind you. But you've never really had a healthy sense for danger, have you?" Harry smiled at that. "Fudge seemed to think I'd run right into that prisoner who's escaped recently. Sirius Black?" Draco's heart dropped at that name from Harry's mouth. "Did he?" Draco asked, his voice neutral. Why would he think that?
I don't know.
Harry shrugged.
I guess the Ministry's in a frenzy looking for him.
Yeah, Draco confirmed. It's all over the papers.
I wonder how he managed to escape,
Harry mused, his face thoughtful.
I heard that never happened before.
It didn't, Draco nodded. It's supposed to be impossible to slip by the Dementors. Their senses are sharper than those of wizards, you see.
Dementors?
Harry asked, puzzled. The guards of Azkaban, Draco elaborated. They're creepy, mind you. I heard they suck the happiness out of everything in their proximity. Never came across one, thankfully, but I heard stories.
He shuddered before shaking his head.
Let's change the subject, alright? I've not seen you in so long, I don't want to talk about escaped murderers and mentors.
Harry smiled and nodded. You want to go out to Diagon Alley?
He suggested.
I could do with an ice cream at Florence.
Draco grinned and followed Harry out of the room. Draco spent most of his time at Diagon Alley with Harry for the last 3 weeks of the holidays and was much happier for it. They longingly goggled the newly released Firebolt at Call of Quidditch, killed time going through all the junk at Gambol and Japes, ate themselves through the sweets at Sugar Plums and Florin Fortescue's, and shopped for their school supplies together. It was brilliant being able to spend all this time with Harry without the interruption of boring classes or evil plots or even the other Gryffindors. As much as he loved and appreciated Hermione, and tried to make his peace with Weasley, it was nice to have Harry's complete focus solely on him. They met both Hermione and Weasley the day before the start of their new school year. The Weasleys had returned from their trip to Egypt a week prior after having won a lottery prize and spending it on visiting their eldest son abroad, and Weasley knew no other subject than everything he had seen on the trip. Draco soon abandoned the conversation he and Harry were having for a much more interesting one with Hermione over her trip to France. They ended up going to the magical menagerie together, Weasley to get his ancient rat checked, and Hermione to purchase an owl from the money her parents had given her for an early birthday present. Things did not go smoothly, though. There was a commotion with a cat chasing Weasley's sickly rat out of the shop, and when Hermione decided to adopt exactly that creature in favor of an owl, a fight between the two pet owners ensued. It was at that point that Draco excused himself for the day, though not without running into the rest of the Weasley family and going through the bizarre experience of being treated like an old family friend by the twins as well as Mr. Weasley, and being fussed over by Mrs. Weasley. They met up again at platform 9 3/4 the next morning. Draco's father had, quite unsurprisingly, not bothered to accompany his wife in dropping off their son for the school year, and Draco's mother, on her own, made a valid attempt at civil conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. All in all, Draco was in high spirits when they said their goodbyes and entered the train for their journey. But that was until Harry demanded to talk to them in private and inadvertently dismissed a grumbling Ginny from their group so they could set out searching for an empty compartment. All they found, though, was one that was occupied solely by a sleeping man with clothes more shabby-looking than those Harry had inherited from his cousin. "How'd you reckon he is?" Weasley asked as they sat down with him, observing the man carefully for any sign of consciousness. "Professor R.J. Lupin," Hermione whispered, making Draco frown at her in confusion. "How do you know that?" Weasley demanded. "It's on his case," Hermione replied, pointing at a makeshift nameplate on the stored luggage. "Wonder what he teaches," Weasley mused. "Defense against the dark arts, obviously," Draco shrugged. "There's no other available position, is there?"
"Never mind that now,"
Harry muttered, turning all their attention back to him.
"Ron, I overheard your parents arguing last night down at the Leaky Cauldron, and it seems like Sirius Black, the escaped murderer, is actually after me."
They just stared at Harry, thunderstruck. Or at least that's what Weasley and Hermione looked like. Draco, for his part, was simply horrified.
"He seems to think that murdering me would bring Voldemort—"
All three flinched at the name, and Harry ignored them, pressing on.
"back to power, or something deranged like that. Ron's mom didn't want me to be scared, but his dad insisted that I needed to know so that we don't do anything reckless. Or did I go looking for Black, though I have no idea why he thinks we would do something so stupid."
Draco took a shaky breath, filling his lungs with air again, so Harry did not know about Black's connection to his parents after all. That was something, he assumed. "Sirius Black escaped to come after you?" Hermione whispered, lowering her hands from her mouth, where she had raised them in shock at Harry's words.
Oh, Harry, you'll have to be really, really careful. Don't go looking for trouble, Harry.
I don't go looking for trouble, Harry protested, affronted. Trouble usually finds me. I'll think when Harry have to be to go looking for another who wants to kill him, Weasley muttered, his voice unsteady, a proof that he, too, was unaware of Black's connection to Harry, despite the knowledge his parents obviously held. Though Draco figured if Weasley had known, he'd have told Harry immediately. He wouldn't have wasted a moment thinking about what that information might do to their friend.
Mr. Weasley just wanted to make sure you are prepared, I guess. Draco spoke up finally, catching Harry's eyes. And I think he's right. We need to be extremely careful.
But they'll catch Black, won't they? Hermione said anxiously. I mean, they've got all the Muggles looking out for him too.
What's that noise? Weasley interrupted their discussion, and a search for the high whistling sound ensued, which surfaced a sneakoscope that Harry had apparently received from Weasley for his birthday, and that was giving out a noisy alarm, spinning and glowing in Harry's palm. Draco immediately looked at the sleeping teacher, memories of Quirrell coming back to him as he scanned the curled-up man closely. Weasley, meanwhile, explained that the product was a cheap one, so he shrugged the whole thing off, and the sneakoscope was stored back into Harry's trunk, wrapped into a pair of old socks. We could get it checked at Hogsmeade, Weasley suggested, and there was a subsequent discussion about the wizarding village across the lake from Hogwarts, which was fun until Harry disclosed that the Muggles hadn't signed his permission form, and therefore he wouldn't be able to join them on the trips. Weasley protested on top of his lungs, making up plans on how to sneak Harry out of the school, which both Hermione and Draco immediately shut down.
We just discussed the danger Harry is in, Weasley, Draco hissed. Are you really thinking enough to expose him to an insane murderer unprotected just for a couple of sweets from Honeydukes?
Weasley's temper flared at that, and he glared at Draco as he spat. Black wouldn't dare talk if we were with him.
Ron, he murdered a whole bunch of people in a crowded street.
Hermione snapped just as fiercely as Draco.
Do you really think he's going to worry about attacking Harry just because we're there?
Right, Draco agreed. As much as I want Harry there with us, it would be stupid to risk everything by...
That was how far he came, though, before Hermione, unnoticed by everyone else, released her cat from his basket. Crookshanks used his newly gained freedom to jump at Weasley's rat, pushing their wagon into chaos, and both Hermione and Weasley into a new shouting match over their pets. Aquila and Hedwig, who had been sleeping in their respective cages, were hooting indignantly at the noise, which made Draco smile at Harry, who only returned the expression tentatively.
Listen, Harry, he muttered under the cover of their friend's argument. I know you're upset about not being able to go, and I really wish you could, but I just want you to be safe.
I know, Harry sighed, but he was kept from saying any more when Professor Lupin stirred in his sleep, effectively shutting Hermione and Weasley up. Their trip to the school proceeded rather normally after that. No more arguments about Black or Hogsmeade or pets were started, and they peacefully munched away on the pumpkin cake they had purchased off the trolley and chatted about this and that. Lupin continued sleeping peacefully, and he was even useful in his unresponsive state by keeping Nut, Crab, and Goyle out of their compartment with his mere presence. Everything stayed eventful until, towards the end of their journey, the train suddenly slowed prematurely and came to an abrupt halt, switching the lamps off with it and leaving them in total darkness. Hermione's fingers slung around Draco's elbow instinctively. "What's going on?" Weasley asked.
Ouch! Ron, that was my foot!
"Do you think we broke it down?" "Don't know." Weasley then plastered himself against the window glass, looking outside and announcing with slight hysteria in his voice that something was moving outside. Without conscious thought, Draco was reaching out, feeling around for Harry in the darkness. He found his knee, and Harry covered Draco's hand with his in a reassuring gesture as they heard the compartment doors opening. Longbottom came in, stumbling over Harry's legs and breaking their connection, followed by Jenny, and in the chaos of movement and people moving in the dark, Lupin woke.
"Quiet!"
he demanded in a hoarse voice, and in the next moment he lighted a magical flame as a source of light. Draco inwardly reprimanded himself for not thinking of that before.
"Stay where you are,"
he instructed, getting to his feet, but at that moment the compartment doors slipped open once more. It revealed a slim, cloaked figure, inhuman in its posture and eerie in a way that made the hair on Draco's neck stand on end. It reached a long-fingered hand out for them, its skin gray and slimy, and Draco shifted away from it instinctively, bumping into Hermione. The hand withdrew once more, and the creature took a long, rattling breath, causing Draco to feel cold all over, as if all the warmth had been sucked from the room with that single breath. Hermione was still clinging to his arm, but Draco could not feel any warmth from her fingers or her body pressed into his side. The cold seemed to be soaking into him, filling his chest and spreading through his veins. Draco shuddered and faint echoes filled his head. The rustling of papers, the scratching of a quill, and the overwhelming feeling of panic. Damp footsteps on a stone floor, and Harry screaming. He immediately looked at the other boy, but Harry was in his seat, silent and pale. He didn't look well, Draco realized. His breathing was uneven, and he looked somehow faint and sickly. Then, quite suddenly, his eyes slipped closed, and he sunk down to the floor like a marionette that had had its strings cut. It was enough to shake Draco out of his stupor. "Harry!" he gasped, reaching out for him in the same moment that Professor Lupin called, "None of us are hiding Sirius Black under our cloaks. Go!" When the creature still didn't move, he pointed his wand at it and roared, "Expecto Patronum!" A foggy wolf jumped from his wand, emanating light and warmth and chasing the creature out of the compartment. The door fell closed behind it with a rattling noise which seemed unnaturally loud through the previous stillness. "Hurry!" Draco breathed, tearing his arm out of Hermione's grip and slipping out of his seat toward his friend. Harry did not react as Draco grabbed his shoulders, shaking them. "Harry!" "What happened to him?" Weasley demanded, moving in from beside them. "I don't know," Draco whispered. "He just fainted." He shook Harry once more, a little harder this time, and finally the other boy stirred. "Harry!" he called, and green eyes fluttered open behind those dingy glasses. "Harry, can you hear me?" He met Draco's eyes at last, and recognition sharpened his face. "What happened?" he muttered, straightening himself, shrugging off Draco's hand in the process. "Where's that thing? Who screamed?" "No one screamed," Weasley noted nervously. Harry took in the compartment, all attention still on him, green eyes bright in fear and confusion. "But I heard screaming," he insisted. "I did too," Draco confirmed, feeling the burning gazes on him now, though he didn't turn to meet them, his focus still on Harry. "But I think it was in my head." A loud snapping sound broke the silence and directed their attention to Lupin, who had produced a bar of chocolate and was breaking it into gracious pieces. "Here," he said, handing the biggest to Harry and distributing the rest between the other occupants of the compartment. Draco frowned as he took his, staring at it uncomprehendingly. "Eat it. It'll help." "What was that thing?" Harry asked Lupin, still sounding shaking. "A Dementor," Lupin explained. "One of the Dementors of Azkaban." Understanding dawned on Draco, and he took his place between Hermione and Ginny again. "Eat," Lupin repeated. "It'll help. I need to speak with the driver. Excuse me." He exited the compartment, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. "No one touched the chocolate." "You sure you're okay, Harry?" Hermione asked anxiously. "I don't get it. What happened?" Harry asked. Weasley tried to give an unstructured and barely comprehensible retelling of the events, but Draco could not focus enough to listen, his mind completely on Harry. The other boy was soaked in sweat, something he had not noticed in his panic, and his hands seemed to still be trembling as he brushed the damp hair from his forehead. Draco felt unsteady himself, but none of them seemed to be as strongly affected by the Dementor's presence as Harry, and worry for his friend clung at Draco's chest like a niffler to gold. Harry seemed to be thinking along the same lines because he asked rather awkwardly, "But didn't any of you, know?" Weasley said, observing Harry anxiously. "Jenny was shaking like mad, though." Harry's face, still devoid of color, regained some flush at those words, though Draco knew they were a sign of shame rather than health. Lupin returned at this point. He looked into the round with a small smile and noted, "I haven't poisoned that chocolate, you know." They all tentatively nibbled at their pieces then, so Draco, with one last look at Harry, took a bite too.
Warmth immediately spread through him, and he let out a soft sigh of relief.
"We'll be at Hogwarts in 10 minutes, the teacher announced before turning to Harry. "Are you all right, Harry?" "Fine," Harry muttered, flinching in embarrassment.
They spent the rest of the train ride in near silence. As soon as they arrived at the entrance hall of the castle, they were called upon by Professor McGonagall.
"Potter? Granger? Malfoy? I need to see the three of you in my office."
They turned towards her in alarm, and Weasley looked between the three of them in confusion.
"There's no need to look so worried," she said impatiently. "I just want a word in my office. Move along there, Weasley."
Weasley seemed slightly offended at the exclusion, but made his way to the Great Hall as instructed, while Harry, Hermione, and Draco followed McGonagall all the way towards the Transfigurations corridor. They exchanged puzzled looks. Draco could not explain to himself what exactly this could be about, not to mention why he had been called out alongside his Gryffindor friends by their head of house. Sure, McGonagall was deputy headmistress, and due to Draco's friendship with Harry, she had always taken a certain interest in him, but still, the teacher responsible for him remained Snape. Some of that confusion cleared, though, when they reached McGonagall's office and found both Snape and Madame Pomfrey waiting for them.
"Professor Lupin sent an owl ahead to say that you had taken ill on the train, Potter," McGonagall announced, and Madame Pomfrey approached him briskly.
Harry flushed a dark red. "I'm fine," he protested. "I don't need anything."
"Setting Dementors around the school,"
the matron muttered, ignoring him and pushing his hair back to feel his forehead.
"He won't be the first one who collapses. Yes, he's a clammy. Terrible things they are, and the effect they have on people who are already delicate."
"I'm not delicate," Harry argued.
"Of course you're not."
She waved him off, taking his pulse. After some discussion, Harry assuring them that he felt just fine, and that Professor Lupin had already given him some chocolate, they agreed that he was fit to join everyone for the feast.
"Very well," Professor McGonagall said. "Kindly wait outside while I have a quick word with Miss Granger and Mr. Malfoy about their timetables. Then we can go down to the feast together."
Draco frowned, flashing a questioning look at Professor Snape as he left. His head of house looked impassive. Finally, the door fell closed behind Harry, and McGonagall gestured to the empty chairs in front of her desk.
"Sit, please," she requested. "Professor Snape and I have been discussing your course choices over the summer. Both of you chose to take up more than 3 elective courses in this school year. I assume you have not changed your mind about your choice of subjects."
Understanding dawned on Draco. He had completely forgotten about that. He quickly nodded along with Hermione.
"Very well," she nodded. "We encourage anyone who wishes to study, of course, but there is the issue of conflicting timetables. The electives have been scheduled in overlapping time slots, you see, and it is strictly speaking not possible to attend all classes for any student."
"So we will have to drop some?" Hermione asked, looking crestfallen.
"No, you don't, Miss Granger,"
McGonagall conceded with a smile, not noting how Snape rolled his eyes behind her.
"I have been in contact with the Ministry of Magic, and I have been able to procure a time-turner for you."
"A time-turner?" Draco repeated, his eyes wide.
"Yes, Mr. Malfoy,"
she confirmed, pulling open a desk drawer and picking up something from within. She held up a necklace with a miniature hourglass for them to see.
"You will have to wear it around your necks when you use it. One turn will bring you back 1 hour. Like this, you will be able to attend various classes in the same time slot."
"We have to insist, though, that you use it with care," Professor Snape said sharply, dark eyes zooming in on both of them. "Not only is this artifact incredibly valuable, but going back in time holds a certain danger. You must not come across yourself while in the past. The consequences of such an encounter could be severe."
"You are also advised not to tell anyone about our agreement," McGonagall added. "I have vouched for you in front of the Ministry, ensuring them that you are both superb students and are to be trusted with such a responsibility, but this promise does not extend to any other students. We depend on your discretion. Understood?"
Yes, Hermione and Draco replied in unison.
"Very good."
She nodded, handing the time-turner over to Hermione, who turned it in her hand, staring at it in awe.
"It is needless to say that you are prohibited from using it for anything other than academic purposes. If you encounter any problems in the usage, please speak to either Professor Snape or me."
I also want to point out that if we hear about any misuse, Professor Snape warned, his voice slow and clear, or if the device lands in any hands apart from your own, we will retract that privilege and there will be grave consequences for both of you. Duly noted. Draco nodded, meeting Snape's eyes head on. The teacher nodded with an air of finality.
Good,
McGonagall said, getting to her feet.
Please put it away safely, Miss Granger. I don't want to leave Mr. Potter waiting any longer.
They joined the feast shortly after the end of the sorting, Hermione and Harry taking their places next to Weasley at the Gryffindor table, and Draco dropping into a seat near the lonely back of the Slytherin table.
He could see Not looking back to him, searching his gaze with an evil smirk, and Draco knew that whatever he had to say couldn't be good, so he kept his gaze on the headmaster as he gave his yearly welcoming speech.
As you will be aware after the search of the Hogwarts Express,
Dumbledore said, his clear voice carrying through the hall,
our school is presently playing host to some of the Dementors of Azkaban, who are here on Ministry of Magic business.
He paused and Draco sneaked a look across the hall towards Harry, but the other's eyes were fixed on the headmaster.
They are stationed at every entrance to the grounds, and while they are with us, I must make it plain that nobody is to leave the school without permission. Dementors are not to be fooled by tricks or disguises, or even invisibility cloaks.
Draco bit his lip, decidedly not glancing at Harry this time around.
It is not in the nature of a Dementor to understand pleading or excuses. I therefore warn each and every one of you to give them no reason to harm you. I look to the prefects and to our new head boy and girl to make sure that no students run foul of the Dementors.
Draco kept staring at the headmaster, an uncomfortable feeling of dread settling in his stomach. He knew that technically the presence of Dementors to keep his deranged cousin out of the school and away from Harry should calm him, but after their encounter with them earlier that night, it made him feel extremely wary. The feeling that had washed over him when the Dementor had entered their compartment was still fresh on his mind. But more importantly, he could not forget the effect those creatures had had on Harry. He did not want them anywhere near him.
As to our second new appointment,
Dumbledore said, making Draco blink as he resurfaced from inside his own head,
I am sorry to tell you that Professor Kettleburn, our Care of Magical Creatures teacher, retired at the end of last year in order to enjoy more time with his remaining limbs. However, I am delighted to say that his place will be filled by none other than Rubius Hagrid, who has agreed to take on this teaching job in addition to his gamekeeping duties.
Draco gasped at that, a grin forming on his lips as applause broke out from the Gryffindor table, extending to Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff and dying at Slytherin. But Draco did not care that he was the only one from his house to cheer. Hagrid looked overjoyed and embarrassed, and Draco felt a grim satisfaction that after all the trouble he had caused Hagrid last year, he had now received this job as a result of his name getting cleared. He deserved it, Draco decided, even if he felt a little wary about the creatures Hagrid would end up showing them. Dinner appeared on the table then, and Draco, just noting how hungry he was, dug into the chicken with delight.